In this week's Bizline, Vietnam's economy registered strong growth according to World Bank. And later on, Vietnam, a promising logistic hub. Hello there, you're tuning into Bizline, our weekly economic journal on VTV International. I'm Hoàng Hằng, and as usual, we now take a look at news making headlines in Vietnam's economic scene this week.
Vietnam's GDP grew by 13.7% year-on-year in the third quarter of this year and 8.9% over the first three quarters, according to a report released by the World Bank on October the 20th. Vietnam macro monitoring shows that industrial production and retail sales posted another month of high growth rates, which could be attributed both to strong economic activities and to the low base effects. Both export and import growth slowed in September due to decreasing demand from major export markets. FDI commitment fell in September, affected by the heightened uncertainty about global economic prospects, while FDI disbursement continued to improve.
On Monday, the State Bank of Vietnam decided to widen the Vietnam Dong US dollar spot exchange rate band from plus or minus 3% to plus or minus 5%. The adjustment was made to proactively cope with unpredictable developments in the international markets and monetary policy tightening by global central banks. This was the first time the exchange rate band was adjusted in 7 years. While the US dollars rose by 20% this year, many other currencies like the yuan and won dropped by 29% and 22% respectively.
According to the Ministry of Industry and Trade, logistics activities in Vietnam have made significant progress in recent years, increasing the country's trade turnover rapidly. Vietnam ranks 11th among the top 50 emerging logistics markets, according to a ranking recently published by transport and logistics service providers. This result is thanks to the strong efforts of logistics enterprises to improve their services. The annual growth rate of the Vietnamese logistics market in the period of 2022 to 2030 is forecast to reach 5.5%. Foreign investors also assessed Vietnam as having many opportunities to develop logistics services. Vietnam currently has about 5,000 logistic enterprises.
After more than 4 months of implementing Decree number 34 on extending the payment of taxes for businesses affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, so far, tax authorities across the country have extended over $3.7 billion in tax payments for enterprises. Specifically, the total amount of value-added tax extended was $2.1 billion. The total corporate income tax extended was $1.6 billion, and personal income tax for business households and individuals extended was $8.3 million. Over the past 4 months, thousands of businesses have benefited from this policy, allowing them to contribute to the budget. As a result, GDP in the third quarter of this year increased by over 13%, and total state budget revenue in the first 9 months reached 94% of the estimate.
Those are some highlights in Vietnam's economic scene. Up next in our crosstalk, we will discuss Vietnam's potential to develop its logistics and attract investors in this sector. Logistics have been one of Vietnam's fastest growing and stable sectors, expanding by a double-digit growth rate annually. Solid economic fundamentals along with strong trade and a strong manufacturing sector have provided tremendous opportunities for Vietnam to boost its logistics sector further and become a regional and global logistic hub. So how much potential does the country hold to develop logistics and attract investors? And what factors will contribute to the sector's development in the future? We'll find out more in this week's episode of Bizline. But first, let's take a closer look at this clip on how Vietnam's logistics sector has developed recently.
Vietnam ranked the 11th among the top 50 emerging logistics markets, according to the 2022 Emerging Markets Logistics Index released by logistics and transportation service provider Agility. Regarding international logistics opportunities, Vietnam ranked 4th and is said to have great potential for logistics expansion in Southeast Asia. According to Vietnam Maritime Administration statistics, total sea cargo throughput over the first 4 months of 2022 reached 241 million tons, rising 2% compared to the same period last year. In addition, as Vietnam's seaport network continues to expand, many can now receive ships carrying more than 200,000 tons of cargo. As Vietnam transforms into a global manufacturing hub, it has emerged as a key market for sourcing and diversifying operations in Asia. Along with a favorable geographical location, fast-growing economy, and improved infrastructure, the e-commerce boom has also contributed to the momentum of logistics development in Vietnam. The sector accounts for around 2.5% of the total GDP with an annual growth rate of 14 to 16% and a valuation of around 40 to 42 billion US dollars yearly.
To gain a deeper perspective in the sector, we are joined in the studio by Mr. Marcello Piazza, Managing Director of JAS, an Italian-founded global freight forwarding corporation headquartered in USA. Well, thank you so much for joining our BizLine Talk.
Thank you for having me.
So how do you assess Vietnam's potential and competitiveness in terms of logistics?
Vietnam has been praised by the Global Economics Forum in the past 15 years for its incredible speed in progress in growth in terms of industrialization, and also the quality of the logistics sector that incredibly grow into the economic development of the country itself. Therefore, it has been particularly attractive for the logistics sector in terms of foreign direct investment, and therefore also our company, together with other multinational logistic providers, have the ability to invest heavily into this prospectus market. Nowadays, the competitiveness of Vietnam resides primarily in its dynamism, in the way that the young generations of the people of Vietnam want to take the lead in terms of application of new ideas, investment on information technology, implementation of new infrastructures that allow the country to be more performing, having a faster return of the investment that the foreign companies put into the territory.
As an investor in the country, what do you think about Vietnam's favorable environment for logistic development, as well as the country's position for good transshipment between countries and regions?
This country represents the beacon for the logistic hub related to those countries neighboring the Mekong River. And Vietnam has been elected, by the market as the prominent economy that can allow the other countries to interchange infrastructures, and I mean seaport and airports, due to the fact that these countries, all the neighboring countries linked to the Mekong River, has signed a free trade agreement with each other for exchange of services and goods tax-free. And this allows, obviously, such a prominent economy like Vietnam to thrive and to be the hub for this very special mini region, which is going to be extremely strategic for the global stage of logistics in the next 10, 15 years.
Vietnam air freight industry is the next emerging economic sector that is likely to become the center of attention for investors and also logistic players. As a global investor in various types of freight, including air freight, what do you think about this statement?
In this particular moment, given the surprisingly, but yet very effective image of stability of economy of Vietnam, allows the major carriers that we utilize, our own company, but the entire market is evaluating the possibility to invest more and more into the country. The air freight market of Vietnam is definitely growing, and the necessity to increase capacity is a reality. And considering, again, that The market itself for consumers encompasses 100 million potential consumers, which is the population of Vietnam, and considering their young age, the fact that Vietnam is taking more and more important position in the airfare market is not only a beautiful reality, but also a necessity for the market itself.
After more than 3 decades of development work, Vietnam's freight market has grown by leaps and bounds, with the output last year recorded at 1.3 million tons. The nation's air cargo traffic in 2022 is expected to grow 17% from last year to more than 1.52 million tons, accelerating beyond the average annual expansion of 15% of the last 30 years.
There's been a tremendous amount of growth in the air freight market. Vietnam is really hitting its stride and, barring any unforeseen global events, I think we're going to see a very positive economic period coming up. We see the growth both from a trade perspective as well as with domestic consumption.
Most of the service providers in Vietnam's air freight market are foreign players. However, thanks to its huge potential, the sector has gained the attention of more investors both internationally and domestically.
Logistics của Việt Nam thì có mức độ tăng trưởng từ khoảng độ 16 đến 18%, và đối với loại air cargo, tức là dịch vụ vận tải bằng hàng không, thì con số này thậm chí là còn cao hơn. Khi chúng ta có thể thiết kế những đường bay chuyên nghiệp, chuyên dụng, chuyên biệt, và như vậy thì chúng ta có thể nâng cao cái khả năng tiếp cận thị trường của các doanh nghiệp.
According to the International Air Transport Association, Vietnam's air logistics could expand at an average of 6.7% per year between 2015 and 2035, higher than the world average of 3.9% and the 4.6% of the Asia-Pacific region. This is partly thanks to the country's airport system. Tân Sơn Nhất International Airport already has the only specialized cargo terminal among the 8 airports in the south. When Long Thanh International Airport goes into operation, it is also expected to drive southern region efforts to develop into a specialized regional and national aviation logistics center.
The Mekong Delta is known as the country's agricultural production hub, which means the demand for logistics services is high. So what can be done for Vietnam to utilize its position in the Mekong Delta region to foster trade and activities between logistic development?
Mekong cluster can be utilized by different nations, not only Vietnam, in this very example, how, for example, Cambodia can help one day the Mekong River Delta, in which Vietnam belongs, to vacate more cargo in and out and utilizing Cambodia's infrastructure. So one of the ways I can see that the bottleneck situation of the Mekong can be alleviated is utilizing neighboring infrastructures. In this case, I refer to Cambodia.
Italy is currently the third largest trade partner of Vietnam in the EU, while Vietnam is the largest one of Italy in ASEAN. So how can such trade cooperation development as well as the implementation of the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement facilitate your investment in the logistics sector in Vietnam?
The fact that we are the third largest partner in Europe after Germany and France is a testimony of this important alliance in terms of economic exchange of services and goods. Italy will benefit from this economic ties as much as Vietnamese economy, because the new FTA in place will obviously allow more investment to be allocated into this country, and also allowing also Vietnamese to pour their own investment into the territory of Italy. The fact that Italian products are quite recognized to be appealing to the market, the production of all goods that Vietnam is actually making in high level of craftsmanship is very much appreciated by the customers and the end consumers in Europe, and in this particular case in Italy.
In the first 9 months of 2022, Vietnam's export turnover racked up an impressive $282 billion, an increase of 17.3% year-on-year. There were also good export results reported in markets with which Vietnam has signed free trade agreements.
The FTA that entered to force in August 2020 create a better condition about the bilateral trade between Europe and Vietnam, and in this case, between Italy and Vietnam. Of course, the most important sector that from Vietnam go to Italy, we have also usually the electronics. We know that Vietnam is a big hub for electronic items. The demand from the Italian company is still high, and this is as a consequence of the increasing of the production.
Vietnam is expected to export $368 billion worth of goods this year. Therefore, enterprises are gearing up to hit their targets. For example, this company exports 90% of its products to the US and the rest to the EU and Australia. It aims to obtain $163.67 billion in revenue, equivalent to 2,000 containers of goods. Therefore, its demand for logistics is high.
Với định hướng chiến lược của công ty là sẽ xây dựng chuỗi cung ứng chủ động, thì công ty đã chủ động đàm phán với khách hàng để chuyển dần sang giao hàng theo phương thức ship và DDP. Có nghĩa là công ty sẽ chủ động trong việc book container, giao hàng đến cảng đến và kho người mua tại bên Mỹ cũng như châu Âu.
Meanwhile, the growing entrance of global giants into Vietnam facilitates the country's exports and demand for freight forwarding services.
Vietnam, we believe, will attract a significant proportion of multinational corporation manufacturing hub investment that's coming to Asia Pacific. We expect by 2025, 2/3 of global manufacturing will be done in Asia Pacific.
Vietnam's export has seen positive figures and are forecast to continue to thrive. So how has this driven the logistic demands in the country?
In our sector, we reflect what's going on in terms of economy, no? So the more demand is being satisfied by the market and satisfied by the fruitful production standards of Vietnam, the more obviously the sector of logistics is thriving because it has to sustain the demand of the market. Nowadays, there is a worth of export products, according to last year's statistic, of almost $300 billion worth of exported products. And they expect to reach $500 million in the next 3 years. Therefore, obviously, this will follow a surge of exportation, because anyway, this country is an exporting country for the most, although they have to import a lot of raw material for the transportation and the transformation of this of the final products. But yeah, definitely the exportation will grow consistently due to the high level of appeal that the country already is procuring, around the global stage.
Vietnam has been increasingly seen as an attractive investment destination for foreign investors in the manufacturing sector. Notably, a number of tech giants have decided to build factories in Vietnam. So how will this foster the logistics sector?
According to the recent studies that we made, we found out that more and more countries are putting down foreign direct investment into the countries. The major investors are referred to being Koreans, Japanese, Singaporean, Taiwanese, and companies of the size of Samsung, LG, Toshiba, Sony, just to mention a few, have the largest manufacturing plants outside their own territory in Vietnam, meaning that, again, this is a testimony, further testimony of the high quality and proficiency in manufacturing of important production and high-tech products of notable logos into the market. And this, let's say, great appeal that Vietnam has in ability to produce such such quality attracts more and more investment from a number of foreign countries.
Vietnam is seen as a potential place for foreign investors in logistics. This company started its Vietnam operation in 2012 with a charter capital of about $6 billion. To date, the company has 4 offices across Vietnam, shipping goods of 13 industries between Vietnam and over 150 countries and territories. The company is currently providing 27 different services.
We have been a member of a lot of free trade agreements, and we have a good policy in terms of foreign direct investment that create a lot of demand in terms of logistics.
The rising demand for logistics and the increasing appearance of market players have facilitated the sector's competition and boosted logistics companies to meet higher customer requirements.
We have been implementing our own software, that is to supply the need to our customer demand. Customer demand to have all data to be integrated from their system to ours and from ours back to them. So they can control and they can see the whole supply chain. We have one own system, like we call it Global One System, where we create one single file here in Vietnam, for example, and the whole world can see. We share our system to the customer. We share our data to the customer. And that makes a lot of sense for the supply chain.
The outlook of Vietnam economy is very, very bright. And I believe that the logistic company here also prepared themselves very well. I noticed a lot of investment into human resources, technology, and market exploration. As a customer that work with different regions and services, our company usually receive updates about new routing, new solution, and possibility to cut costs and improve service.
Vietnam's logistics and transportation market is forecast to grow 7% annually from 2021 to 2026. This promises huge potential for logistics investors in the country.
As a market insider, in your opinion, how important is the application of information and technology in logistic firms' development and services regarding the current market context and trends and including the boom of the e-commerce market?
Information technology obviously is an inevitable condition sine qua non. You cannot work properly. However, I always pose an important part of the attention in human capital because our industry is managed by human beings. Therefore, the systems are integrative of our own service, and I refer particularly to our specific sector. However, obviously, considering the mass volume that companies like ours or our own competitors or the market requires to move, necessitate to have an important information technology overstructures.
As an investor, what are your recommendations for the sector to further thrive in the coming time in terms of infrastructure, technological application, and also policies?
I have quite vivid and bright optimism, in relation of the ability of the country to overcome challenges that are, I would say, objective in this case. But, the country also proved to be extremely smart and dynamic in finding solutions. I would say that at the seaport level, the countries actually are up to the standards of international, let's say, expectations. Okay, recently, when the port of Haiphong already re-qualified itself, opening new terminals that are catering large vessels, very large vessels, because they have deep sea water, in which they can allocate and allowing some of major carriers to berth and directly and call in our services in terms of transportation between this country and Trans-Pacific directly. Same experience happening in Cat Lai here in Saigon in the south, where major investment has been done. New projects of implementation of new port nearby Vũng Tàu, made by some of the major carriers that are investing heavily. The major hurdle in terms of infrastructure of this country is roadways. And back then, the country was not able to sustain this major growth in terms of, in terms of build-up of infrastructure regarding motorways. Nowadays, the difficulties to move trucks from one position to another, it's an evident reality. So much that the Vietnamese are quite smart in this case and utilizing all rivers. However, this smart way cannot compensate the necessity that the country has to build up new roadways, because this is probably the most let's say, most challenging factor for a fluid economic growth for the country.
Once again, thank you so much for joining our BizLine talk show.
Thank you very much.
Vietnam set a target that the logistics sector will make up 8 to 10% of the country's GDP and grow by 15 to 20% by 2025. In order to achieve such target, Vietnam's plans to lure investment capital to build logistic infrastructure and develop regional and international level logistics centers, especially in big cities and provinces. Additionally, improving policy and the legal framework for logistics, developing the logistics service market and raising the capacity of logistics service businesses are also major focuses. With these solutions, the country anticipates attracting more investors and transforming Vietnam into a regional and internationally important logistic hub. And that brings us to the end of our BizLine program. For more news and updates, please log on to our official website at vtv4.vtv.vn or subscribe to our YouTube channel, VTV4 Go. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time.